afternoon, everyone. The President of the General Assembly, Abdullah Shahid, will have his first in-person public activity since returning from Palau tomorrow. President Shahid will meet with Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield, permanent representative of the United States, and this will be the monthly coordination meeting with the upcoming President of the Security Council. Earlier today, President Shahid marked Chinese Language Day with a video message. He noted that as one of the 6 official languages of the United Nations, the Chinese language is spoken by the largest population in the world. Chinese characters carry with them eons of history, he said. They represent the timeless wisdom embedded in Chinese civilizations. Speaking at a celebration organized by the UN Secretariat and the Chinese mission to the UN, President Shahid said that today's event gently reminds us that a babel of languages need not divide us, but should unite us as we aspire for a more peaceful, equitable, and inclusive world. That's all I have for you today. Any questions for me? Okay, let me check if there's anything in the chat.
I have a question, Ola. I'm sorry.
Yeah, please go ahead. Abdulhamid.
It's Abdulhamid. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you, Abdulhamid.
Okay. My question is about this draft resolution introduced by Liechtenstein about the what is called veto resolution. Can you tell us more about it? It says that 57 countries are co-signing this. Can you mention some of these countries, please?
In terms of who the co-sponsors are, I don't have that information. Liechtenstein can probably share that information with you. The way that it works is once it's an electronic system that opens up for co-sponsorship. So there's no way for the Office of the President of the General Assembly to have access to that while it's going on. So I can't tell you about who else is co-sponsoring. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Has the President scheduled any discussions on the reforms of the Security Council?
The discussions, you know what, let me double check the last time that they were held, because it's an ongoing process, and I think in the last several weeks there have been discussions. So I can go back and check on the schedule. Thank you. Any other questions for me? Okay. Oh, I see a bunch in the chat. Sorry about that. Marta?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
The sound is very bad from here. My question is about an article from The Guardian who said Antonio Guterres urged to take a lead in security peace in Ukraine or risk future of UN. It's a letter sent to the UN Secretary General with a call to be more proactive about the conflict in Ukraine, signed by more than 200 former UN leaders. We want to know Antonio Guterres' reaction to this letter. Can you tell about this?
Thanks for that question, Marta. Stefan Dujarric will be briefing right after me, and he speaks on behalf of the Secretary General. So I would ask that you reserve that question for him.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Let me go down the list. I see Alan. Okay. Well, you put the question in the chat so I can answer it. The question is, do you have the date for a vote on the draft? No, not yet. It's not set yet. I can confirm that the official request has since come in, but we have not. I don't have a date to announce yet. Marta, Alan. Okay. I think that's everything. Let me just triple check. Any questions for me in the room? No? Then great. Stefan will be out momentarily.
To celebrate the return of our lost son. Welcome back, James. All right. I have quite a bit of stuff for you today, and some of it is even news. All right. In a short while, we'll be delighted to be joined by Yasmin Sherif, the Director of Education Cannot Wait. She will brief you on her recent visit to Moldova and efforts to support Ukraine refugee children. On Ukraine, I can tell you that yesterday afternoon, separate letters were handed over to the permanent missions of the Russian Federation and Ukraine. In these letters, the Secretary General asked President Vladimir Putin to receive him in Moscow and President Vladimir Zelensky to receive him in Kiev. The Secretary General said, at this time of great peril and consequence, he would like to discuss urgent steps to bring about peace in Ukraine and the future of multilateralism based on the Charter of the UN and international law. He noted that both Ukraine and the Russian Federation are founding members of the United Nations and have always been strong supporters of the UN. On what is going on the ground, I can tell you that we are gravely alarmed by the mounting humanitarian crisis in Ukraine amid intensifying Russian offensive. I can tell you that we are gravely alarmed by the mounting humanitarian crisis in Ukraine amid an intensifying Russian offensive in the east of the country. Today, the UN Crisis Coordinator for Ukraine, Amina Wad, warned that the loss of life and severe trauma caused by attacks on hospitals, schools, places of refuge is utterly shocking, as is the devastation of critical civilian infrastructure in the country. The UN Refugee Agency, for its part, said that 5 million people have now fled Ukraine. More than 7 million are displaced within the country, and 12.65 million are estimated to be directly impacted by the war, stranded in a war zone, or unable to leave. Our humanitarian colleagues are also telling us that a new UN-led interagency humanitarian convoy has safely reached Chernihiv, a city in northern Ukraine that has been besieged until recently and is heavily impacted by the war. This is the first time the UN and our humanitarian partners have managed to deliver much-needed assistance to people living in Chernihiv and nearby communities, and the fifth successful interagency convoy since the escalation of the hostilities. Today's convoy delivered 9 trucks of critical relief supplies for more than 13,800 people in Chernihiv that will be distributed by the Ukrainian Red Cross Society and their local partners. It includes food for 5,000 people, infant cereals for more than 1,600 children, plastic sheeting, jerry cans, blankets for 3,000 people, thermal blankets and solar lamps for about 2,500 people, and water supplies for more than 1,600 people. While these relief items will help alleviate the suffering of thousands of people in Chernihiv, it is still very much far from what is needed right now in Ukraine. The ongoing conflict is putting millions at risk of losing access to food, water, shelter, heating, and essential medicines. To address these massive and growing needs at the speed and scale required, we need constant, free, and sustained access. The main humanitarian challenge is to secure safe access in areas with ongoing fighting. We, along with our partners, still have not been able to reach areas where people are in desperate need of support, notably Mariupol and Kherson, despite extensive efforts and the ongoing engagement with the parties to the conflict. We are continuing our dialogue with both parties with the aim of urgently and immediately and consistently negotiating and facilitating the delivery of critical humanitarian assistance to the people who've been hardest hit by the conflict. For its part, the UN Population Fund warned that the war in Ukraine continues to cause terrifying suffering, destruction, and displacement, taking a disproportionate toll on women and girls. To respond to soaring humanitarian needs in the country, UNFPA is coordinating and bolstering life-saving sexual and reproductive health services and protection and response services for survivors of physical and sexual violence. The agency says more than 13 metric tons of reproductive health were delivered to 7 hospitals in Dnipro, Kharkiv, Kiev, Zaporizhia, and an additional 27 tons of critical reproductive health supplies and medicines have arrived in Ukraine and will be distributed to maternity hospitals in Chernihiv, Sumy, Kherson, Mykolaiv, and 4 more cities to meet the needs of more than 1.5 million people. And another 41 metric tons are scheduled to arrive later in May. UNFPA is also distributing dignity kits and essential items to support women's hygiene. On the funding part, to date, 68% of the $1.1 billion requested by the initial humanitarian flash appeal has been funded. The continuing increase in humanitarian needs has pushed us to revise the amount requested to $2.24 billion, and we urge donors to convert their generous pledges into real cash, and others who have not pledged to do so as well. As you know, the Security Council held a meeting on Ukraine yesterday afternoon. Briefing Council members were the head of the International Organization for Migration, Antonio Vitorino, and he said that he saw firsthand the price that civilians are paying for the conflict, and he said he was also very much alarmed by reports of discrimination and xenophobia against third country nationals fleeing Ukraine. For her part, the Deputy High Commissioner for Refugees, Kelly Clemens, called on Security Council members to put aside their differences and find a way to end the war. Also want to flag that this morning the Security Council held close consultations on the UN mission for the referendum in Western Sahara, otherwise known as MINURSO. Staffan de Mistura, the personal envoy for Western Sahara, briefed, as well as Alexander Ivenko, the special representative of the Secretary General and head of MINURSO. They both briefed via VTC. And this afternoon, Caroline Ziade, the new special representative for this Secretary General in Kosovo and head of the interim administration there, mission there, will brief Council on the situation in Kosovo. She's expected to urge Pristina and Belgrade to engage constructively and more actively in the EU-facilitated dialogue. And we'll share those remarks with you. Our colleague Amina Mohammed, the Deputy Secretary General, left for Washington this morning to attend the 2022 spring meetings of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, as well as related events. She'll be back here tomorrow. As you will have seen, we issued a statement about an hour ago on Jerusalem, in which the Secretary General said he remains deeply concerned by the deteriorating situation in Jerusalem, particularly incidents in and around the holy sites. He is actively engaged with leaders to do all they can to lower tensions, avoid inflammatory action and rhetoric, and to restore calm. The provocations must stop immediately, he said. The ongoing holy days for Muslims, for Jews and Christians should be a period of peace and reflection, not incitement to violence. The Secretary General reiterates that the status quo at the holy sites in Jerusalem must be upheld and respected. He is committed to supporting Palestinians and Israelis to resolve the conflict on the basis of relevant UN resolutions, international law, and bilateral agreements. The Secretary General also reaffirmed the need to avoid the excessive use of force and to stop all unilateral measures like settlements and evictions that can undermine the two-state solution. On Mali, our human rights colleagues are telling us that they're extremely concerned that the authorities in the country have still not granted UN human rights investigators access to the village of Mora, where, as you know, Malian armed forces, reportedly accompanied by foreign military personnel, allegedly carried out summary executions and multiple other serious violations during a military operations more than 3 weeks ago. Our colleagues tell us that the exact death toll is still unclear. The Malian army has acknowledged that it killed 203 fighters from, quote, armed terrorist groups and arrested 51 people in what they say was a large-scale military operation in the area. Our Office for Human Rights says preliminary information suggests the majority of victims were actually civilians. UN Human Rights Office notes that the Malian transitional authorities have opened an investigation of their own into the incidents, but they call on the transitional authorities to ensure that investigation is timely, thorough, independent, and impartial, stressing the need for them to provide prompt, safe, and unhindered access to the area to the UN mission's own investigators. The UN Human Rights Office adds that an independent, on-the-ground investigation is critical and that time is of the essence to ensure accountability and prompt and effective justice for the victims. In the Central African Republic, the humanitarian coordinator for the UN there, Denise Brown, today strongly condemned attacks on humanitarian organizations. In the latest attacks on the 7th and 9th of April, 6 aid workers and health district workers were injured, one seriously while on mission in the south of the country. These attacks forced one of the concerned organizations to suspend its mobile clinics and its activities to improve the access to clean water to 11,000 people in remote areas in the Basse-Kotto prefecture. Since the beginning of the year, 43 security incidents affecting humanitarian organizations were recorded in which 11 aid workers were injured. These security incidents hamper the delivery of humanitarian assistance, on which more than half of the population depends. Last year, at least one security incident per day affecting humanitarian workers was recorded. And a quick update from South Africa, where our UN colleagues are telling us that they are working closely with the national and local authorities to provide support to the regions impacted by last week's devastating floods. This includes resources and programs to meet the needs in the provinces of KwaZulu-Natal and Eastern Cape. Our team is working with partners so that vulnerable communities have access to dignity packs, blankets, food, and other necessities. And they are also working to restore access to services as well as internet connectivity while ensuring access to health treatments. Our team is also deploying a specialized group to provide technical assistance to town planning, climate resilience, and adaptation. They will visit the impacted provinces in the coming weeks to develop a long-term plan for support and assistance, which adds on to support provided 3 years ago on flooding. Quick update from Thailand, where the team there, led by resident coordinator Gita Sabaral, said they are continuing to support Thailand's efforts to tackle the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. Over 12 million people have benefited from UNICEF's cold chain equipment, along with about 3 million syringes provided to hospitals and health centers. For its part, UNESCO has boosted digital skills for 280,000 Thais, including youth and adults in non-formal education, while UNDP and the International Labour Organization provided vocational training to nearly 20,000 women and persons with disabilities impacted by the pandemic. In addition, the Food and Agriculture Organization is improving supply chain resilience through 10 smart farming pilot sites. The agency is also helping medium and small enterprises in 66 provinces to reduce food waste in livestock, fisheries, rice, snack food, and dairy products. I want to note that tomorrow our guest will be Michael Dunford, the World Food Programme's Regional Director for East Africa. He'll join us remotely from Nairobi to discuss the current drought in the Horn of Africa, and I will end with a quick note in Chinese, Zhong Wen Ri Kuai Le, which, as you all know, means Happy Chinese Language Day. Happier note, we thank not one but 2 capitals today. Our friends in Dhaka and Ashgabat have paid their checks, have sent in their checks, which have been cashed for the regular budget for 2022. So we say thank you to our friends in Bangladesh and Turkmenistan. James.
Thank you. Can I ask you more about the letters that the Secretary-General has sent to Ukraine and Russia? What is the idea of this visit? Is the Secretary-General planning to be himself a direct mediator to try and come up to a solution in this crisis, and how quickly could such a trip be arranged?
We're going to take things one step at a time. So the letters were sent. The idea would be for him to go to both capitals, to Moscow and to Kiev, to meet with both presidents, to discuss whatever urgent steps can be taken to stop the fighting. I'm not going to give him a label in terms of what he will be doing, but this remains part of the Secretary General's good offices, which he's been talking about really for quite some time.
A couple of follow-ups.
And in terms of timing, I think first we have the first stage, so to speak, is getting a response from both capitals.
This follows his call for the humanitarian pause, the 4-day humanitarian pause over Easter. Can you first give me whether you've had any, we know what the Ukrainian reaction is, have we had any reaction from the Russian Federation? Because if you're going to have a pause over Easter, time is very short.
We've noted the comments made by the Deputy Permanent Representative of Russia yesterday in the Council. Let's be honest, the important response is what happens on the ground and when and if and when the guns can be silenced. We have not seen that today.
Two new initiatives then from the Secretary General in recent hours follows a letter that was sent from more than 200 former UN officials, including people like Andrew Gilmore and Jeffrey Feltman, which seemed to take a little bit of a swipe at the SG and said he needed to intensify his personal diplomacy. Are these initiatives in response to that sort of criticism?
No. I mean, as you can imagine, these initiatives are things that are not cooked up in some lab in a few hours. The Secretary General has been working on this for quite some time. And I think, as the letter said, the people who signed it, who I'm sure are full of goodwill, as they said themselves, they don't know what may be going on behind the scenes. The Secretary General has done appeals to silence the guns before. He has been directly involved in trying to get humanitarian pauses by sending Martin Griffiths to Moscow and to Kiev. And I think you were here. I think the day the fighting broke, and I think his very direct and emotional appeal to the president of Russia. So this is all part of his engagement since the conflict started. Celia, and then...
Going back to Mali, does it mean that the UN is not able to do the job, like to investigate? I mean, what will happen?
Well, that's exactly what it means. I mean, we cannot. Yeah, we cannot force our way into the town. We need the authority. We need the Malian transitional authorities to let us in. So, it is critical for any investigation to have a presence on the ground. There are other methods that investigators can use to gather information, but really a centerpiece of any investigation needs to be a visit to the ground. We are continuing to talk to the Malian transitional authorities to try to get access.
Yeah, but what is the point to have a mission in a country if the mission cannot do its work?
Well, I mean, I think you will have seen by what we have said here for the last months, if not years. We talk about what the mission is doing, going out, they're putting themselves in the front lines, paying the ultimate price, protecting civilians, doing what they can to fulfill the mandate. But there are certain things where we need the authority. I mean, the UN is not the mission is not the colonial administration in Mali. The UN is there to support the Malian state and the Malian people. We need to work in cooperation with them, and we try to as best as we can. Mr. Abadi.
Thank you, Stefan. Follow up to James' question. If the Secretary General gets invited to Moscow and to Kiev, who will accompany him from here?
besides yours truly, who would, but I mean, we'll take it one step at a time. We will share with you information on the delegation when we reach that step. Jen, and then Stefano.
Thanks. Further on that, have you gotten any indication that these requests would be welcomed or accepted?
No, we have not. The letters were handed over in person to both representatives, both permanent missions yesterday. We have not received any news so far. Stefano.
Yes, one question on Libya, one on a follow-up on James. The talk in Egypt didn't go well, and so they talked about an agreement on a constitutional frame to arrive to election. So what is next step in the sense that can we still believe that that these elections are going to happen, and that Williams is she, what kind of communication she had with the Secretary General about those talks? And then a follow-up on the question James did. I remember being in this room when he was saying that the Secretary General was going to the Olympics, and we asked why not instead of the Olympics. Will it be more important to stop in Moscow and Kiev? Any regrets about not doing this before?
No, the Secretary General, I think, has been extremely methodical, has been doing what he thinks is the most practical and the best way forward for him to deploy his good offices and the work of the UN. He went to Beijing. Mr. Putin, as you will recall, left right that evening after the ceremony, and he was not able to see him. We had been in verbal contact with the permanent mission of Russia a number of times to try to get at least direct contact between the Secretary General and the President. That did not happen. He is. We are. There are no. I mean, we are moving on a path that the Secretary General has established. That the regret is that this conflict keeps going, and that the people keep suffering. Right. Oh, Libya. No, I mean. Listen, what is happening is clear for all to see. Ms. Williams will continue to engage with the leadership and the different political actors on Libya, trying to get them to come together. Ray.
Thank you, Stefan. 2 days ago, Mr. Martin Griffith in this room said that for the Russians, the humanitarian truce or ceasefire is not a priority. Are there any development that encourage the Secretary General to send these letters, or any comment about that?
I mean, what is going on the ground is as clear to you as it is to me. The fighting is continuing. Civilians continue to be in the crosshair. Civilian infrastructure continues to be destroyed. We are trying multiple avenues and multiple ways to try to get this conflict to end, and at least in the short term get some sort of a silencing of the guns so we can get humanitarian aid to those who need it. Celia. Did you have another question, Mr. Chairman? Go ahead, Celia, vas-y.
Going back to the letters, did the Secretary General send letters before to Putin or to Zelensky, and we did not know about? How come we know it today, just after
the contacts had been had verbally before messages were passed through the permanent missions.
Okay.
Mr. Abadi.
Thank you, Stefan. A few weeks ago, the Secretary General addressed the Assembly on peace building, and he said he asked the Fifth Committee to allocate $100 million in assessed contribution for peace building. What amount of that amount will be devoted to preventive diplomacy? He also said that private investment will be involved. Can you explain?
Well, I mean, private, I think money from outside sources is exactly what that means. The money for, peace building is, in a way, a form of preventive diplomacy. All right, let me go to Benno on screen. Benno?
Thank you so much, Steph. Also, I wanted to say I love your tie, but I have a follow-up to obviously, if one of the sides doesn't agree and doesn't want the Secretary General in their capital, would the Secretary General still go to the other country, or would it be just a trip if he to both the countries?
I think we're going to take this one step at a time. We will wait to see responses, and then we'll make decisions, appropriate decisions, based on the responses that we receive. Okay, any more questions in the chat? Unless, hold on, you're not yet in the chat. You're in person, James, but I will get to you. Abdelhamid, please.
Thank you, Stefan. On April 13, Mauritania said that 2 of its nationals were killed near the border of Western Sahara in the disputed area near Gargarat or somewhere there. Did MINURSO confirm the incident? Did it happen, or it just...
I don't have any information on that. I can try to check, but I have not seen anything. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. James, and then we'll go to our guest.
A couple of, one more Ukraine-linked one. Russia has been carrying out missile tests, including a new ICBM. Given the crisis going on at the moment, does the UN see this as provocative?
Look, we are always, I think we would reiterate our call for continuing disarmament and a lowering of arsenals of such weapons.
One on Yemen. The Yemeni Network for Rights and Freedoms, which is a body that represents more than 50 local NGOs, human rights organizations, is saying that there have now been 203 violations of the truce since it came into effect by the Houthis. So I suppose the question is, when is a ceasefire no longer a ceasefire?
Let me check on what we are monitoring and what we're.
Okay, and I have another one that you'll probably have to check on. But I'm somewhat confused. And this was a story at the end of last year. The representation of Myanmar in Afghanistan. Myanmar, we know what was decided by the Credentials Committee, which was to leave things in place. And yet, in other parts of the UN system, like the ICJ, the military junta has been allowed to speak. And in the Human Rights Council, it seems the seat is empty. I mean, it doesn't seem... You would think there'd be a joined-up approach to this.
You would.
A country or a government is either part of the UN or not.
I understand. I mean, I think in terms of the ICJ, it is up to the ICJ to decide, to make a sovereign decision, so to speak, for the judges to make a sovereign decision as to who they are willing to hear from and on whose behalf people are speaking. So I think that's for them to say. Yeah, I mean, if there is a seat empty in Geneva, there's a seat empty in Geneva. I mean, these are complicated, if not somewhat unseen situations that we've seen. And so it's the UN. You would think some things happen, but in fact...
But is the Office of Legal Affairs looking at this?
It's... the Office of Legal Affairs provides the Secretariat for the Credentials Committee, but at the end of the day, it is a decision for member states to accept or not to accept. And it is definitely not for the UN Office for Legal Affairs to tell the ICJ judges how to run their court. On that note, I will get our guest, who's been very patient. Great. We are delighted to be joined by Yasmin Sharif of Education Cannot Wait. Yasmin holds the enviable title of most interesting remote briefing when you briefed us last from an airport hall, I think in Islamabad. So we're happy to have you here in person to talk about Ukraine and I think as well Afghanistan. Please.
This one, right? Yeah, it's on. Thank you, Stefan. Thank you so much for having Education Cannot Wait, which is the United Nations Global Fund for Education in Emergencies and Protracted Crisis, back again. Thank you, Stefan, for that. Let me first start by expressing and joining the international community our, I would say, condemnation and also sorrow for the attack against 2 schools and learning centers in Afghanistan yesterday, the first in Mumtaz Tuition Center and in Abdul Rahim Shahid High School in Western Kabul, Afghanistan. And our heart cries out for the families, to those affected. We don't have exact figures. Reportedly, 9 school children were killed and reportedly 50 children were injured. So our heart goes out to them. And we call for respect of international law and the Safe School Declaration. I started my career in Afghanistan in 1990. And today, it has gone from bad to worse. Nothing is getting better in that country, and it is on the verge of a humanitarian collapse. So I really hope that all UN member states come together for the long-suffering people of Afghanistan. Close to 24 million people are in dire need of humanitarian assistance. Girls are going back to primary school, and we are cautiously optimistic that secondary schools for girls will also open very soon. We will not give up until every girl is back to school, and boys, of course. Now I will move on to the mission to Moldova that Education Cannot Wait conducted last week together with the United States, USAID, United Kingdom, FCDO, their word, the UN High Commissioner for Refugee, the Refugee Agency, UNICEF hosted the mission, and civil society representatives. We met with the Minister of Education, we met with the Education Advisor to the President, and we obviously met with the refugees and the refugee children in Moldova. And we decided, Education Cannot Wait, as a global fund, to add to the $5 million that we recently, in emergency support for education, recently committed to Ukraine in the midst of the armed conflict. And now we also announced an additional initial $1.5 million in emergency support for education to refugee children and youth in Moldova. And I say initial because we do not know what the situation will look like in the near future, given the geographical location of Moldova and what might happen. So we also have to have a contingent planning and keep monitoring the situation, because there might, and we hope it will not happen, but there might be a second flow of refugees. The total of $6.5 million that Education Cannot Wait has contributed to the Ukraine crisis and the refugees in Moldova, which is possible thanks to our critically important strategic donor partners and private sector and foundations, will go to, first of all, above all, psychosocial support and mental health. We met with refugee children and their mothers who were absolutely traumatized by the journey. Met with one mother who had fled, taken the only family car from Odessa and fled with her 2 daughters across the border, leaving her husband and her mother behind in Odessa, only for the sake of security, safety, and education for her children. So it shows how they prioritize education and safety and security. All goes hand in hand. And when we spoke with them, the mother broke down and the girls looked very traumatized. There are 50,000 children like that, refugee children, in Moldova. And as you know, Moldova is the poorest country in Europe, and with the refugees accounting for nearly 4% of the Moldovan total population of 2.6 million. And yet the government of Moldova have shown an absolutely open door policy, been very generous in receiving refugee children, and also to integrate them in the national school system, which already before the attack and the conflict in Ukraine was already stretched, given the poverty of Moldova in general, and now on top of it receiving refugees fleeing for their life into Moldova. So the challenge here for the Moldovan government with this generosity is how to accommodate an additional 50,000 children into the school system. There are language barriers because Romanian is the official language mostly spoken in Moldova. There is also a challenge of tracking the refugee children because 90% of them live in host communities, and so far only 1,800 children and youth have been officially registered and joined the public schools. And the reason that it's so difficult for the government to track them is because they were not prepared for this. Moldova never expected to be a host country for refugees fleeing in such a short span of time and so suddenly, and already with its own economic challenges. I think I should take this opportunity, though, because during the mission, the United States of America, USAID, announced an additional $18 million to Education Cannot Wait, the UN's global fund. For globally, we have invested in 42 crisis-affected and refugee-hosted countries. So they announced an additional $18 million, which makes the United States the third largest strategic donor to Education Cannot Wait. And the second largest is United Kingdom, who is also one of the founder of Education Cannot Wait. And the first is Germany, that just a couple of months ago announced $200 million, an additional 200 million euros, euros to Education Cannot Wait, and have contributed over $330 million in total. We are a fund of $1.1 billion today and hope to grow, because we are speaking about 130 million children left furthest behind in conflict, climate-induced disasters, and wars as refugees whose education has been disrupted. And without education in SDG 4, no other human rights or sustainable development goals can be achieved. That's the very foundation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. James?
Thank you very much for doing this. James Bays, Al Jazeera. My question is about Afghanistan. You said that you were cautiously optimistic about all of the girls' schools being reopened after, of course, they were going to reopen them last month and it was abandoned at the last minute. What gives you that optimism? And, I mean, I suppose it's a question linking with Ukraine. I mean, obviously the problems for the children from Ukraine are immense, but how worried are you that Afghanistan is getting completely overshadowed, and that the perhaps necessary pressure on the Taliban to change their attitudes to female education is not there because the world is looking at Ukraine?
Please.
Thank you. These are excellent questions. Thank you very much for asking them. First of all, when it comes to girls' secondary education in Afghanistan, we know, and there have been public announcements of that certain organizations like the Swedish Committee for Afghanistan and the Aga Khan Foundation have been able, through negotiations and with the work of religious scholars in certain parts of Afghanistan, negotiating at the district and provincial level, have been able to reopen secondary school. So at the local level, it's already happening. Now, your question is nationally. Well, as this much we know, is that there are proponents for girls' secondary education also within the Taliban leadership. And then there are those who have a more not human rights-based and gender-oriented approach to it. And we are hopeful that good will prevail here. but there are ongoing behind-the-scenes discussions. I led myself the first all-women mission to Afghanistan in October last year, and we met up with UNICEF in Afghanistan. And we met, of course, as we do in the United Nations, and have informal dialogues with the Taliban representation. And there were those who are really fighting for girls' education, not only in primary, they're all back, but in secondary, being fathers of daughters. So it's not a consensus that secondary girls should not go to school. And as United Nations, we always have to be optimistic. We always have to be that. We are paid for that. That's why we are in this job. And having worked in Afghanistan for many, many years, I hope that their culture, the beautiful culture, will prevail, and human rights and girls' rights. I hope it will come one day, inshallah, as they say. When it comes to Afghanistan being overshadowed by Ukraine, the United Kingdom convened together with Qatar and Germany the donor pledging conference in London just a few weeks ago, and I cannot recall if it was $2 to $3 billion that were actually being pledged. And so the UK has taken a very strong role, Germany a very strong role, Qatar a very strong role. And I have to say also the UN Special Envoy for Global Education, Gordon Brown, who is also the chair of the high-level steering group of Education Cannot Wait, who was also a strong driving force behind that conference. So many of us are keeping, including member states of the United Nations, are keeping Afghanistan on top of the agenda, as do many UN agencies, such as UNICEF, OCHA, UNHCR. I think the High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, was only there a couple of weeks ago. We will not let Afghanistan go. But, you know, there are crises, and we have to deal with Ukraine, and we have to deal with Afghanistan. But let us never forget Afghanistan, because it's been in conflict situation since the late 70s. It's really, when I say long suffering, it's long suffering. We're speaking about decades here, and generations of children who have lost a possibility to a quality education.
Thank you. Ibtisam Azam.
Thank you, Steph. Thank you. Good to see you again. I have first follow-up on a few follow-ups on Afghanistan. So when you say that the Swedish initiative and the negotiations and it able to bring back some of the girls in some schools back, but that's mostly private schools. Am I wrong? Or the like schools that are Swedish schools or financed by Sweden, not public schools, if I'm not mistaken. And then also, what about universities? And were you able to get to the root cause why the Taliban reversed their decision the same day where they were supposed to open the schools? Is it more because of division in the between them, or? And I'm asking that because maybe knowing the cause also will help find the solution. And then I have another question about Ukraine and your work to provide for Ukrainian refugees. So you are giving support in which countries neighboring to Ukraine? And what about the, we heard, I think, Monday from Mr. Griffiths that according to some Ukrainian estimations, there's more than 870,000 Ukrainians who are going back to Ukraine. And most of them are women and children. So are you also working with the Ukrainian authorities when it comes to providing education to internal displaced Ukrainians, or are you working only in neighboring countries? Thank you. I'm sorry for so many questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Excellent questions as well. And I just want to make sure I give you the right figures, which I have somewhere here. But let me start with Afghanistan. The system in Afghanistan is community-based education. And the Swedish Committee for Afghanistan, Aga Khan Foundation, UNICEF, and many other organizations, Save the Children, Norwegian Refugee Council, and so forth, have long supported community-based education. Because that's the way the topography and geography of Afghanistan is, actually also a very decentralized country. They are linked to the public school system. There is no, first of all, we do not provide any funding for national execution or on budget to the Taliban. It goes directly to UNICEF, directly to Save the Children, directly to Swedish Committee for Afghanistan. But they are operating and supporting community-based system that is linked to the public system. It could be that some of the schools supported by, or all of the schools actually, according to the statement by the Swedish Committee for Afghanistan, all the schools supported by them had reopened, and this was just, I think 2 months ago, reopened the secondary schools for girls in areas where they were providing support. Afghanistan is living off international financing. It does not have its own budget. So everything is public, but it is international assistance that is providing that support. When it comes to Ukraine and why the decision, well, you know, there may be many different answers to that, and I would not like to, unless I was absolutely verified as to why the decision was changed. I think, let us say like this, and this is in every society, there are ways of interpretation, okay? As I said, there are division of opinion within the Taliban movement. And then how do we interpret, you know, our faith, our religion? How do we interpret it? And as I said, we hope that the interpretation be based on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, because it's actually derived from all world religions. When it comes to Ukraine and Moldova, we are actually, that was our first intervention. That was into Ukraine and to the displaced children in Ukraine right now as we are speaking. And I think there are 3 million children inside Ukraine whose education has been disrupted. And that's why we came in with a very big emergency funding of $5 million. And that was already in March. So we are already in Ukraine investing, working very closely with the Minister of Education of Ukraine. And as a matter of fact, tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock, I have a meeting together with a few colleagues and partners with the Minister of Education in Ukraine to see how we further can support remote learning for those who have left the country, and what we can do in addition to the $5 million we have contributed through partners who are providing assistance in country. And then Moldova. And the reason we focused on Moldova is that it is it's the poorest country in Europe, and it's not a member of the EU. Though we know that the EU is also providing support. But normally education cannot wait. Do not go into EU countries or we are focusing on those left furthest behind, sub-Saharan Africa, refugees around the globe, of course, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, the Middle East, and it's not the normal area of work, if you put it that way. However, if there's an armed conflict and a war in Europe, and the poorest country, Moldova, is in need, we will be there, and the same goes for Ukraine. That is not a member of the EU either, but it's receiving support. But still, it's a full-blown war, and we have to be there. That's our mandate.
Thank you. Mr. Abadi?
Thank you. Thank you for this presentation. You mentioned some specialized agencies. What about UNESCO, that is par excellence in charge of education? What role has it been playing in alleviating the situation in Moldova?
Well, you know, we are all working on education, and I would say UNESCO is the lead agency on education in the UN system. UNICEF is the lead agency on education in emergencies. UNHCR, the lead agency on refugees, and World Food Program on school feeding. And we are just the fund. We are the catalyst. We bring the advocacy and the funding to make sure they have what they need. UNESCO, we did not interact with them in Moldova because Moldova is normally, before the crisis, did not have many UN agencies on the ground. The refugee agency had one person in Moldova until the conflict broke out. Now they have escalated and increased it to 80 staff. But normally, Moldova was not high attention country for UN agency or civil society. It was a peaceful, poor, however, country. So I would not be surprised if UNESCO moves in very fast as well, as soon as and are already working with them. But since we are speaking about UNESCO, I must say that they have done fantastic. We work very closely with them on not the least in preparing the Secretary General's Transforming Education Summit during the UN General Assembly. But if you all remember the explosion in Beirut, when big parts of Beirut were destroyed from the explosives in the harbor, I can happily share with you today that thanks to the collaboration and partnership between UNESCO and Education Cannot Wait, UNESCO has repaired every single school that was destroyed and completed that work in Beirut. So I bow to UNESCO for that work.
Thank you. We'll go on screen. Iftikhar Ali, Associated Press of Pakistan. Iftikhar.
Thank you, Steph. Ms. Sharif, you spoke extensively about how your efforts to promote education inside of Afghanistan for the girls. What about millions of Afghans who live outside Afghanistan, especially in Pakistan and Iran, whose numbers are gradually increasing?
Thank you very much. This is a very important question, and Pakistan has hosted Afghan refugees from Afghanistan for decades. And at one point, the Afghan refugees in Pakistan hosted the largest refugee population in the world. And then, of course, they started trickling back. Well, I'm happy to be able to share with you that Education Cannot Wait, together with our partners in Pakistan, the Ministry of Education, UNICEF, UNHR, and many other civil society organizations and UN agencies, we are actually launching a multi-year investment for education in Pakistan. And it's both for refugees, but also for host communities, Pakistani children and youth in their communities, which is always the case, refugees and the host communities. So, yes, indeed, we are present in Afghanistan and provide that support.
Thank you. Stefano?
Thank you.
Thank you, Stefano Vaccara, Voce di New York. The Security Council, I believe in September, passed a resolution where the people of Afghanistan, I mean, the Taliban regime will have to allow the people of Afghanistan that wanted to leave the country. So did you see that after this education crisis, I mean, since the Taliban decided that the girls cannot go to school, are you aware of families that want to leave Afghanistan because they want an education for the girls, and maybe they want to come here in the United States? I asked the U.S. ambassador, so are you going to welcome any Afghani that wants to come here? She said yes. Did you see this? There is any Afghani family that wants to come anywhere in the world to give an education to the girls?
Thank you very much. Well, I didn't physically see it with my own eyes, and I think that the UN Refugee Agency would be able to give you much more factual information on departure of Afghans seeking refuge elsewhere. in order to get an education. But I've seen, of course, Afghan refugees in Pakistan, which hosts 1.5 million Afghan refugees today, refugees on the Greek islands in Europe who fled even before the Taliban in order to create a better life and get an education. So I cannot respond to this, empirically evidence-based because I did not see it. However, it is often a common pull factor. And as I mentioned also, the mothers fleeing from Ukraine, it is a pull factor besides security and your well-being. It is to safeguard the education and the future hope for your children. That's why people flee and become refugees, yes.
A very quick follow-up, but what are you, your organization, what is ready to do to facilitate, to help Afghani family that today wants to leave Afghanistan to give an education to their girls?
Well, Education Cannot Wait provides investments. We invest funding in education to our colleagues who work in the UN system, to our colleagues in the civil society and non-governmental organizations. We do not transport or facilitate for populations to leave their country. That would be the UN Refugee Agency or IOM who are more involved with that. So we don't operate like that. We provide education in Afghanistan. We invested $36 million and are creating a new multi-year program of $300 million for education in Afghanistan with an emphasis on secondary school for girls. And the programs that we have implemented through UNICEF and other partners since 2018 has reached all our programs, 60% of them were girls. So we work with affirmative action, we leverage funding to increase the number of girls and to promote human rights and gender equality through that. And we support primary schools for girls in Afghanistan today. And depending on where they flee, if they were to flee to Pakistan, yes, they would benefit from Education Cannot Wait's investments there. And as I said, we are also supporting refugees through their work, the civil society organization, UNICEF and UNHCR, on the Greek islands. Afghans who have fled, I think there are over 60 nationalities who have fled trying to get to Europe and who are sitting in those reception centers on the islands, and we are investing in their education.
So I have to say the last follow-up. Would you advise today a family in Afghanistan that want to give an education to their girls to leave the country?
I would absolutely not advise anything of that kind, neither for nor against. This is their decision. All we can do is to provide support to our UN colleagues and civil society to provide education. I don't think we have a right to advise anybody what to do with their life. And if they feel fear, that fear, not even we can feel that. They will know what to do. I must say, I worked with refugees and people suffering conflict and armed conflict for 33 years. And one thing I've learned, and it's actually a Persian poet called Omar Khayyam, he said, "Who are you to teach and who am I to learn? I don't advise. I learn from them."
Thank you. I think we have one more question online. Dulcie, are you able to connect? Dulcie Lembach from Pass Blue. Okay, I think the question she wanted to ask was, are boys allowed to go to school at the secondary level in Afghanistan?
Yes, they are. They are allowed to go to school, and that's where the problem is. We cannot support a gender discriminatory system. We will not. And all our strategic donor partners and member states are absolutely firm on this. We cannot support schools where only boys are allowed if girls are not allowed to go to school. If they want to segregate girls and boys, that's not our business. They do that in boarding schools too. If they want the girls to dress a certain way, well, everyone have their dressing code. But if girls cannot go to school and learn, and boys can, we cannot support such schools. We will only support where girls and boys have equal, inclusive access to go to school. That's the leverage, and it's a human rights-based approach, and that's taken by all our strategic donor partners.
On that note, a very clear note, thank you so much, Yasmin, and it's nice to have you here in person. We hope to see you again soon.
Thank you very much, Stefan, and thank you all of you for your great questions. Thank you.